The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below.
Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor Thomas Goss, bringing you the second part of our study of the orchestration of the first movement of Debussy's La Mer. We left off the last lecture in studying this section here between rehearsal marks 3 and 4. Just to quickly recap, there was this lovely melody here in doubled octave horns, and then there was a reaction to it. Ba-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da-dum, bum. And then bum, 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 bum. So all three of these ideas, the horn octaves, this back and forth little flurry reaction, and this falling figure here, they're all going to be developed in this next section that we are going to study right now. But first, Debussy is going to introduce another bit of thematic information. Bum, 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 bum. This is being played by first oboe solo, plus an octave below, first cello solo, and then 2 octaves below that, double basses pizzicato. Now there's a missing pizzicato mark here, but don't worry about that. This is pizzicato on these double basses, as you'll hear in the recording that I'll play in a few minutes. Now there's a wonderful sense to this triple unison here, and that is that the very chesty part of the overtones in the solo cello blend in beautifully with the fundamental note here of the oboe, and then the overtones of the oboe have a beautiful radiant color to them with so much support. And then of course, right at the bottom, anchoring this little melody, and at the same time performing the function of the bass line in the double basses. That's really a wonderful idea. And I especially love it right in here where the double basses do a little bit of counterpoint all of a sudden. They go down by half steps, so that they can reach right here, this little C flat. This push right here, bum, 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 by both of these instruments. That is also going to be developed on the next screen, but we will get to that in a minute. First, I should point out that the harp's right hand is playing along with the cellos at the same pitch, and it's not really going to be heard that much, but it's a nice thing for the harpists to do for themselves. They've got the best seat in the house for hearing their own instrument. So it'll make sense to them and it'll be nice for them to play, but it really is not going to be heard that much. What will be heard is the left hand going back and forth here, which is doubling the cellos up to right around here. And then at this point, these figures in the left hand just become independent. Now, if you've been studying harp, you'll notice right away that Debussy is breaking the rules. And this is the kind of rule breaking that isn't possible to move forward as some kind of great stride in music. This is the kind of rule breaking that basically just does not work on the instrument. So there is no way to get a double flat on a harp. You have to use the enharmonic equivalent. Here, that would be an actual D natural and G natural. And since there's a D flat right here, this would have to be tuned to a C sharp. So that would be the way of getting around the problems that are inherent in this kind of double flat writing. Same thing here, there is no way to play a B double flat. This would have to be an A natural. Seeing as how there are no A flats until right here, then that's not too hard of an ask for the harpist just to change that one pedal. C flats, of course, are perfectly possible, and in fact, the key of C flat major is the most relaxed position for the strings to be in, and of course the most resonant. So a lot of these passages where you've got F flats and C flats and everything else, that is actually the optimum length for the strings. Well, we'll get to this in a minute. But against that very effective left hand and those cellos, the others, as opposed to the solo cello, we have this lovely triplet figure here, these sextuplets, being played by the middle strings, the seconds and the violas. And I just really love the way that they provide a different sense of water surging and swelling and lapping back and forth, as opposed to huge arpeggios, as we saw in the comparison in the introduction to Ravel's conception of the way that the ocean should react. So this is really kind of a burbling, bantering, sloshing kind of C that isn't really hugely powerful yet, although that will come. But it doesn't really need to have these big sweeping arcs. And when everything is kept closer together and more simply stated, then I feel that it is easier on the musicians to control the dynamics in statements such as this. And I really love the way that the lower winds come in here to help out, and this lovely high B-flat octave here. I mean, look at this. Here is a high B-flat with no ottava over it, right? Perfectly easy to read for the average section violinist. So that is the first idea, and notice how it is a nice square 4 bars. And same thing here. There's a nice square 4 bars. And in fact, a lot of this first movement has very conventional 4-bar phrases. Sometimes there are a couple of bars added which help transition to the next idea, but it's still kind of a 4-bar idea. So some of this writing really reminds me of his work from piano music in, say, the early part of the decade that he was writing in, things like Suite Bergamasque, for instance, or Pour le Piano, for instance, has got a lot of little square phrases in it, even though it's quite adventurous and really takes piano playing into a new direction. It's not a criticism, just an observation. Here, our thematic material has this wonderful feeling of opening up. Just that single solo flute with really no big help to it besides just a little bit of color from beneath. This A flat on the oboe lends just a little bit of context and a little bit of color to the flute above it. And the effect is that it's a very sweet, very intimate, very personal moment. And then it becomes stronger here with the addition of the English horn an octave below, right? And especially as things gain in strength here, Debussy is perfectly capable of adding these other color elements intersecting between these two lines in the woodwinds. And the same role is really being taken here by the horn. The second horn here is playing this low concert A flat an octave below the oboe, and is just really helping this nice stack of overtones that Debussy's got here, but of course marked pianissimo, so it doesn't really dominate. It's not pushing that high A flat so hard, but it really does help it to open up in its color, right? It's a very clever idea. And this little counter melody coming in with the first horn is possible because of, once again, the push in dynamics in the melody. As to everybody else, they are basically playing this idea here in the first harp, going back and forth, either plucking back and forth, as between these two sections of Debussy first violins, or Debussy cellos, or basically just suggesting a lift, right? That is what is happening here with the slurred staccato. Slurred staccato has a kind of a slight bouncy feel to it. So instead of going doink, 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 like a regular staccato or staccatissimo, we've got this So the actual lift between each staccato note, medium staccato note, helps the context of the back and forth motion. And once again, a nautical touch. If you've ever been in a little boat, sailing even just around a little lake or something like that, there is this wonderful feeling of the boat maybe rocking back and forth quickly, or currents lapping up against the boat quickly, but not in a nauseating way, but just in a lovely, slightly bustling way. And this really reminds me of that in my own limited experience of boating. I think I've only capsized a few times, so that really shows you that I am not that experienced a sailor. But I have done some sailing and some canoeing and other stuff. What's interesting is that Debussy did not do any of that. His experience of the ocean was really limited to a few little trips across the English Channel in a ferry boat and being out at the beach and watching the waves hit the shore. That was really his experience of the water, as far as we know. Maybe he might have done a little bit of boating on a pond or something, or a little lake. I don't know. But he really does have a beautiful, colorful sense of the way that it feels to be on the ocean. And in that case, his imagination matches up with my sense of reality. On the next page, we see some of these elements developing. So, bum, 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 bum. First, doubled from below by oboe family instruments. This would be doubled second oboe and English horn, playing over this lovely trading off triplets between horns and clarinets and bassoons. And then bum, 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 which in this case is octave, A2 clarinets and bassoons, with the oboe family playing these lovely surging triplets. At this point, the strings are basically just taking a break, except for a bit of a push on these low grounding notes in our lower strings, and this setup note here, which helps to give the harmonic context of what we are traveling towards. Once again, beautifully orchestrated. The past screen and these two bars, they're just perfect, and so is the rest of this screen. I really don't believe that story about Ravel feeling that Debussy's orchestration of La Mer was imperfect or was bad or whatever, and that he was going to seriously sit down and reorchestrate it. I really doubt that. At the most, it might have been just a fit of pique. He might have been feeling resentful about one or two unkind things that Debussy had said, or just maybe that their relationship eroded a little bit, and that was probably more because of Debussy feeling pressure from his cronies. There is a very sad thing about that period in history, and I suppose that crops up in lots of different artistic scenes in different periods, and that is when you have two people who are very significant and similar in some ways, then they tend to have followers that form little camps and want to fight over who's better. And of course we've all seen this in like the indie rock scene. That is really typical, people fighting over who's better, you know, Jane's Addiction or Nirvana or something like that. You know, that it's just all pointless, and it's just a way of puffing yourself up as a fan. But it can really have an effect on the people who are making the music, who are composing the music. And it seems to have in Debussy's case. He started to distance himself a little bit from Ravel. So maybe Ravel was feeling resentful about that in his old age, and he was feeling a little petty that particular day. But as far as we know about Ravel, he was not a petty person. He was very serious and careful in the words that he spoke. So I don't believe that either. So I just don't feel that the story, the anecdote about Ravel wanting to reorchestrate La Mer has really any credibility. But moving on to this, we see some of the same back and forth motion that formed the basis of the previous accompaniment. These are the same pitches in both flutes and clarinets, but they're offset in the flutes. And we have the same thing going on down here between unmeasured tremolo pitches being hit right on the beat by our cellos, and then offbeat pizzicato from the double basses. And to really get everything completely coordinated, we've got our upper strings, which are going to coincide with each divided beat as they play their figures, which themselves are doubled as each pitch is doubled by the tremolo. It's a really wonderful, mysterious place in the music, and it's orchestrated so lucidly and yet so delicately that you can really hear every note of these beautiful harps right in here. It's, once again, really great harp writing. You have to excuse the occasional forgetfulness of Debussy when he scores a double flat or something like that. It just is really lovely harp writing. This is a model of writing really well for the harps. The only other thing to mention before I talk about the horns is this really, really great idea in here, just playing these harmonic thirds as a little bit of harmonic color, 2 octaves below the same thing in the oboes, and it really just helps to balance out the harmony inside this passage. What else is happening? Of course, the horns bring back that beautiful little melody that we studied at the end of the last lecture and that I just mentioned at the beginning of this talk. And it is exactly the same notes and the same phrasing and this lovely little push right in here, and then it dies off towards the end just like before. But the whole context is different, isn't it? Rather than being this little statement that is sounding across the passive ocean of the strings figuration, here it is helping to bring this whole chapter, this whole part of our morning to a close, as everything seems to be racing down towards this very intimate moment. And the intimate moment itself is really lovely, the way that it frames everything that is going on with the horns. This is very audible, the way that the harps cover some of the pitches of the horns, especially right in here. The way that the clarinets double the tremolo violas, extremely effective. The way these patterns fall down here into the seconds and cellos, which sounds terrific, especially when everything comes down to this very, very soft point right in here. And then, of course, the octave doubling of arco double basses and bassoons. That is just such a lovely sound, and I feel it is so memorable, at least to me, as a boutique orchestrator, as an orchestrator who really looks for those special moments that are unique in and of themselves rather than just carrying on the function of the music, the expression of the melodic and harmonic ideas, but really, really gets into the texture. I find this to be fascinating right in here. And speaking of functions, I really love the way that this pattern right here at the very, very end leads us to the next idea on the next screen. Well, before we look at that idea, let's listen to both of these screens together with the very timely, very, very helpful assistance of the Kaleidoscope Chamber Orchestra. They have a really, really great approach to this. Really excellent harpists on this particular concert. Really great horn playing. It all ties together very nicely. And when you consider that there is no conductor there to point at one person and shush another person and everything, the balance is actually pretty amazing. Listen for the different qualities of tone between these two bars, the way that things push upwards with the flutes and oboe family members, with the horns and lower wind instruments helping from below, and then how the lower winds take over on the push and the oboe family plays the figuration. Listen for all those very, very cool touches in here. the way that the mezzo staccato in the arco instruments of the strings provides that slight lift that coincides with the offbeat notes. Listen for these octaves in here supporting the melody of the flute, and how everything coalesces here as the music surges in dynamic strength. Listen for these beautiful high notes here, these high B flats being played by the first violins, and how that colors the little expression here, the little solo by the bassoon. And also listen for how this new theme enters with the triple octave of oboe, harp plus cello, and then 2 octaves below, double bass playing pizzicato. And I'll see you in a couple of screens. For the second half of this lecture, we go into a section of this piece that is both about tone painting of evocative scenes and development of material. So, starting off with some tone painting, we have yet another theme introduced by first oboe solo. And I really love how when it lifts back up again, the line is doubled by the first flute. That happens twice. Ba-da-dum, then doubled, da-da-dum, doubled. And as this is played twice, it is counterpointed by a completely different line on solo first violin. There are some beautiful touches to this first violin solo, which are easy to miss, because they are not buried in the texture, but integral to the texture. And that is the way that these notes are being doubled from below by English horn and first bassoon in octaves. So this first concert F here is actually providing some harmonic context around which this little reaction is playing in flutes and clarinets. Really, really beautiful harmonies right in here. And this is the anchor for that harmonic motion, and then it picks up right here, this F, G flat, G natural, same exact pitches here in bassoon and English horn, so it supports that as well. And underneath all of this is beautifully placed Debussy second violins and cellos. It is just absolutely perfect. If you are not paying attention, you'll miss it, but if you are paying attention, then you'll hear this beautiful cushion beneath these A-flat fifths, and then the low anchoring A-flat below. And then, of course, the first and second harps playing this lovely arpeggio of roots and fifths going all the way through. We have arrived at A-flat minor, which is really fun with the way that our harmony is going in here. And there are a bunch of intricate little changes that I could be talking about, but let's kind of keep it to the major modulations between sections, because otherwise this lecture is going to be twice as long. We've got this line seeming to go on into the flutes and the clarinets in terms of the melodic motion, repeating and then doubling flutes and oboes, and then clarinets an octave below. And some of the same anchoring of pitch right here in the middle by bassoon and English horn, supporting where the first violin leaves off, but not doubling at the octave this time. Really, really lovely high C flat right up there. And then, of course, there's this great contrary motion right in here by the cellos. Just really wonderful. And I love the little one bar continuation of the reaction to the reaction by clarinets, bassoons, horn, and strings. And I really love the way that the violas and cellos cover all of these dark tones right in here and keep them from sounding too Russian, if you know what I mean. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with following that Russian playbook, but right here, Debussy wants it to be subtle and not quite so dark and throaty. And I really love these little bum, 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 wee, bum, 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 and just the little bits of pizzicato here and there. So, once again, we have like a 4-bar phrase and then just a little bit added on to connect to the next section. And we are back to this lovely little open, light, beautiful solo, but it is no longer placed where it was before. Before it was starting off on an A flat, right? So now it is on an F. And the harmonic context is also changed as to what it's trying to say. And the accompaniment here is very, very simple right at the beginning. All pizzicato this time in the middle strings, but slurred staccato in the first violin's Debussy, playing octaves here. And that is bouncing off back and forth very simply with these doubled harp notes, right? And that is enough against the pizzicato and the doubled harp to create that sense of back and forth, which is so essential. This is interesting right in here. Debussy is asking the harpists to play a harmonic which will sound a unison with the note above. So this is a very piano-like sound. And notice that this also appeared in Pictures at an Exhibition. So it wasn't Ravel's invention to double a played note with a harmonic note to create the sense of a piano sound. But of course, in his context, he is using it as an extremely exposed timbre. So I would say that that's original. A lot of times, what's original about Ravel is the context in which he puts something. And of course, there are many original touches to his orchestration and his composition. I don't want to take anything away from him, but oftentimes he would borrow an idea of another composer and make it better, or rethink it in a way that made it seem incredibly fresh and new. Then this is a lovely way of harmonizing right in here. Horn plus clarinets plus English horn and oboe. And that has just a beautiful sound, especially with everybody playing so softly. And then when this is all pushed into here, the cello really comes into its own right in here. Just lovely, strong idea, which is continued on by double bass and the other part of the Debussy cellos. And right in here, this is such a great cello moment. And the very last phrase really helps to pull together all of these other harmonic elements and all of the other motion in the other instruments here. The clarinets and the horns, and then of course counterpointing with this lift right in here, which leads us to the next bar. But yeah, such a memorable bar right in here. This little bar of 9/8. It's almost like a 4-bar idea with an extra 3 beats at the end. Here we come back to da 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 dum, and this time it's really coming back full force rather than just a couple instruments doubling. It is flutes on top, clarinets below, the English horn taking this top line down an octave, so really 3 octaves on the 5th, and then of course the roots in between with the second players. And then this is great, the way that the oboes come in and really help to focus what's going on with the clarinets, giving it some support. And that's all being played against these lovely oscillating strings in here. A great pattern. And using some elements before of the idea of back and forth motion and simple patterns in triplets and tuplets. And of course, just so bustling here on these octave triplets. Notice that some of these patterns are covering each other, right? So we have A flat going back and forth, G flat going back and forth, and here we've got A flat down to D flat, G flat down to E flat, right? So these form harmonies but in offbeat patterns with each other. Same thing right here between the Debussy lower firsts and the Debussy lower seconds. And then, of course, these are just alternating intervals, but in themselves, they are covering similar pitches to the cellos, so they're also working together. Really a very, very cool bar, and it's just one bar because on the next page, the music is going to go to a different place. However, before we do that, it's worth pointing out that here we finally have some tuba, right? Holding down this nice low G flat. When we look at the next page, we're restating these octave horns, right? And pretty much playing through that exact same melody again. And check this out. The trumpets come in A3, and they are playing very, very clearly some of the same melodic arcs that happened before in the horns. The same exact pitch in terms of concert pitch as this written A flat sounding D flat, C sharp, right? Same thing, only just interpreted in a different key for the F trumpets. So this is going to continue on quite emphatically, actually. It will sound through pretty well. Now in the Kaleidoscope recording, the A3 trumpets kind of hold back a little bit. They don't really push with everything they've got, and I've actually heard it much more pronounced in other recordings, and I feel it kind of spoils the effect of the surging ocean around it. I like the restraint here. After all, it's pianissimo, right? And these other elements are surging up to mezzo forte. So if we're thinking of the orchestral dynamic, then I feel that that is a pretty good choice. There is plenty of loud trumpet playing coming in the next screen, so let's not worry about that. So that's just that underlying thematic element, right? Now the much more noticeable thematic element are these little swirls and reactions. So right in here, our Debussy in 3 strings plus the little bassoon and the rolled harp right in here, they really push down on the strong beats of these bars. So brillium and swirl and delirium, plonk, delirium. And that is really enough to think about, I think. And especially, like, I really love this way that the swirling finishes up those 3 beats, 1, 2, 3, right? And helps to bring this little phrase to a wonderful active close each time. And, you know, interestingly, it just repeats the same thing 4 times. Once again, we've got our sense of repeating 4, which is kind of a natural feeling for us as human beings. We just tend to kind of think in doubles and doubles of doubles. Now, this is lovely right in here. The low heavy brass, the trombones and the tuba come in here and they just push very subtly right into this harmony a little bit as these elements from the previous bar are providing some filigree around the horns and just a touch of bassoon coming in here to help out the horns as well, right? So that is very, very cool. Sharing some of that tone color for just a minute with that kind of coarser, darker element of the bassoon. At this point, right here at rehearsal figure 8, we come back with yada-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-da-dum. Do you remember how the first time this phrase was introduced, it ended with a little hook. Ba-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum, right? So that is going to come back very strongly right at the end of this. But first, let's look at how all of these elements work together. Oboes and clarinets in unison. Once again, we have this strange little ottava line in here, which is completely unnecessary. And there's absolutely just no reason to mark ottava there except for maybe a little bit of vertical compression in the score. So, oboes plus clarinets with the flutes coming in every once in a while, right at the ends of the bars, just to kind of solidify things. And joining them, we have the English horn. Now, this English horn is going to basically be playing the top of these parallel fifths down an octave. So it's going to be riding underneath this. And as all of this is sort of swirling and going on, we have these lovely fingered tremolos in the strings, just really reaching up over and over again. Notice piano crescendo to mezzo forte crescendo, piano crescendo to mezzo forte crescendo. And here you can really hear those harps doubled playing along with the pizzicato of the lower strings of cellos and double basses. And then, of course, this is really lovely in here, the tremolo. And while all of this is going on, the first and third horn are playing this little interval of a major second on the sounding notes of D and E. And this is, once again, that kind of offbeat sort of playing. Bum, 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 bum. And that's just providing a little bit of central, consistent sound. And these same notes are being played in the harmony of all the other instruments, right? We see this D and E right in here and right in there too. So it's helping them to center themselves harmonically as well. And of course, providing some warmth right there in the middle timbrally. Okay, so all of this is coming together, and once again, it isn't big, huge, arcing arpeggios sweeping back and forth. It really is a bustling, frantic kind of ocean movement, but it isn't like big, huge, sweeping waves all the time. And we finally reach this point. Here, those falling three notes come back, but slightly reimagined. Instead of bum, 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 they come back as bum, bum, bum. Very, very powerfully throughout all of these instruments. And this is wonderfully balanced once again. I love this little sforzando, immediate decrescendo over and over again. And what you hear throughout this line here in timpani is that the timpanist continues on in that style, articulating the beginning of each of these rolls. The timpanist for Kaleidoscope Chamber Orchestra does this beautifully, by the way. And that helps bring punch to everything all the way through, even when things get really, really soft towards the end. But it's such an easy kind of scoring right in here. Basically just flutes and oboes in unison, with the clarinets an octave lower, the English horn covering the top note of the clarinets, and then the same thing happening in the first and second violins, those fifths scored the same way. Then we've got the violas covering the lower pitch of the second violins, and interestingly, look at where the cellos are right at the beginning. They are doubling the top note of the second violin. So very, very fierce and very, very bright. And then an octave lower, they're playing those same pitches in octaves. And then below, this is a really interesting thing. Getting back to the bass line here. And that is that the double basses and bassoons and timpani are not following the same line as the bottom of these fifths. Instead of playing F sharp, E natural, C sharp, they're playing D natural, B, G sharp. And it's a wonderful trick to play on the ear because The overtones kind of suggest continuing on as the music starts to die down and the pitches in the lower strings start to adopt that different altered bass line. Your ears think they're hearing this right in here, but they actually aren't. There are possibly some overtones that might be suggesting the continuation of the pitches, but really it is just more psychological. Our ears think we're hearing something that we're not. Debussy does this a lot in his orchestration. And of course, bum 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 bum, here are those trumpets standing out really beautifully, and they are doubled by pizzicato in the strings. Pluck, 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 which is actually playing at the same pitches, right? Remember that this is going to be heard up a perfect fourth, which is right where this pizzicato is. Everything slowly dies away. The harp is actually pretty audible right in here because of the wonderful balance, and then little tissues on the cymbal. And it all kind of comes together down to this tiny little ending. Couple of last little tissues from the cymbal. And notice that cymbal is such a cliche for the splash of waves, and yet Debussy has really underplayed his use of cymbal. I think that's really a wise choice. Let's have a listen to all of the music on those three screens. The wonderful balance right here at the beginning, this very, very fiercely stated descending fifths here, and also listen for how what's going on in the bass is different from the fifths above, and how that slowly takes over, even though it is not the same pitches, but maybe we think we're hearing those same pitches continuing on. And then, before that, this wonderful surging of the ocean. Listen for all of the different elements in there, how the trumpets come in, basically playing a version of what happened before in the horns, and the way those winds team up, restating some of those same little fragments as the strings swirl along in here and the harps and pizzicato lower strings conspire to push the feeling of motion upwards. See if you can actually hear those little harmonic seconds in there as well. And then of course this wonderful sweep right in here of the swirling violin chords along with the roll in the harp and those fifths in the bassoon, which are basically just providing filigree around the restatement of that horn melody just one more time, unchanged, but just feeling fresh every single time because the context around it is always so different. I didn't really talk about the way that these little sweeps are scored before, but you can see that it really is just piccolo on top, and then flutes and oboes doubling, and then English horn an octave lower. So it's a very, very simple kind of sweep. And notice that the clarinets have been left out, and that also helps to produce a specific color. And then, of course, on this first screen, all of those lovely moments, the way that this perfect little bar is scored for just one bar. These textures don't continue on, but they're just lovely as the ba-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da-da comes back. And then all of these lovely things in here, the restatement of that lonely flute melody over the alternating motion beneath it. And see if you can hear that little imitation of the piano right in here, with a harmonic note in unison with what the right-hand notes are playing. And then, of course, this lovely, beautifully poetic moment right in here with the oboe introducing yet another melody over the harp and then against the concertmaster's solo. And see if you can hear the way that the English horn and bassoon support from beneath in octaves at the end of this phrase right in here. Listen for all of those wonderful things and more, and I'll be back in a few days for the last lecture of this month, covering the next section, which is going to take the music in a completely different direction after all of this introduction and development.